There we go.
All right, so we just finished roll call. We have 5 present, 2 absent tonight, at least at this point. So next we have minutes. So would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes, or if somebody has any corrections that need to be made, please make those now.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
Motion by Ann. Do we have a second? Second by Kristen Runge, who put her hand up and spoke, but nobody heard it. So we'll have a second there. Throw a show of hands. We'll do a show of hands on this one. All in favor? Perfect. All right, moving on.
Carried 5-0.
Thanks, Todd. Public comment. Anybody here tonight that would like to make a public comment? Please, if you're out in the attendees, let me see where.
Yeah, I do see 3 attendees, Brian, Brent, and Ryan. I'm assuming all are from Cohen Esri. Raise your hand if you're representing Cohen Esri, just so I know. Okay, that you all are. Okay, good. Thank you.
They are users. They put those hands up immediately. That's awesome. Okay. Some people don't, for some reason, have a tough time grasping onto that. All right, let's get started then. New business. Discuss and consider recommendations to be made to the village board on options for addressing housing task force recommendations 4 and 9. Todd, are you going to take this one or to start with, or is Nicole just going to jump right in with Jason?
Yeah, we'd like to jump right in. I think most of you were able to take a stab at the video memo, but some of that was rehashing what you saw a month ago. Those slides are again included in your packet for reference, but truly tonight we hope to, as I put in my memo here, we hope to get to a point where you can perhaps start to identify action steps that you'd like to see recommended to the board. And with that feedback, I, along with Nicole and Jason at a staff level, we will assemble kind of a plan to accomplish the actions that you desire and put that together as a package to the village board. So we're hoping we can walk away with those actions identified from you here tonight. But with that, again, hopefully that video is a springboard to get us into the discussion tonight. And perhaps, Nicole, you can do like a super basic summary of where we're at, and then we can talk about some of those items.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I won't run through all of those financing tools and things that we talked about at the last meeting and that we ran through in the video memo if you had a chance to take a look at it. But basically what we were hoping to get to tonight, as Todd mentioned, was some guidance from the CDA in terms of what you would like to pursue as recommendations that could then be reviewed and potentially adopted by the village as financing tools that the village would either like to employ directly or to encourage developers and work with developers to utilize on affordable housing projects. So I don't know if you have questions on any of the financing tools or structures that we talked about that you would like some more guidance on, or if anyone wants to jump in with things that they like, things that they don't like, things they don't think would be a good fit, or otherwise, perhaps we can take it from there.
So if you have questions, why don't we do that right now quick with regards to those financing options. Raise your hand if you'd like to. If you don't, we'll just keep moving. All right, I see no hands. Roll along, Nicole.
Okay, so I guess I'll just go through the list kind of in the order that we went through in the video memo. The first financing tool being the WIDA 9% tax credit, which is the financing tool that the Cohen Esri project utilized. There's also what we call the 4-4 tax credit, which is the 4% federal paired with the 4% state. And those are kind of similar in that they allow for a wider range of affordability, provide a little more equity to the project, and both are very competitive, however. So, again, this is one of those things that is not controlled directly by the village, but if the CDA was interested, we could have a recommendation that the village encourage developers to pursue these types of projects, particularly in areas of the village that are high scoring and would therefore be more competitive in terms of receiving this financing source. So would like some feedback or direction from CDA members on your appetite for that, for a recommendation like that, or other than.
And I would add that you're going to hear this word encourage. Often you heard me reference it in the video as well. Number of these fall into that category. So as we step through these, thumbs up or thumbs down on should we encourage is probably a simple enough way for us to approach this. But I saw Jeff stuck his hand up there.
Yeah, well, I just wondered, and this is probably Todd, Nicole, Jason question and your experience with developers, but wouldn't they be an equal partner in deciding which one of those they would be interested in going? And I mean, it doesn't seem like anything we can just say, this is the one you need to use, because it may just eliminate developers.
I actually wouldn't even call it equal, Jeff, frankly. This is something that the savvy developer comes in and says, this is my target.
Right.
And often the village, besides again saying, we're ready to work with you on a project such as this, that's about the extent of our partnership, frankly, at least in the initial process of enticing developers.
Mm-hmm. The idea between a recommendation like this would be to have it included in something, again, that the CEA and then the village board would adopt. And so a developer out there can see, hey, this is a community that wants to see this type of project. So I will go ahead and make that effort and put that investment of time and financing to put together an application and pursue this because it's something that they've stated that they want to see.
So Nicole, when we talk about these developers, and I think probably it's very likely that the high scoring areas are going to be infill projects, based on my understanding, I could be wrong. It seems like in addition to the recommendation to go ahead and review some of this, would it also be appropriate for us to recommend for the village board to support these projects by reviewing zoning with them and as needed, performing actions that would support that project?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the overall support for this type of development. So anyone that submits an application to WIDA, they're going to need their zoning approval lined up. They're going to need a letter from the village saying that it's okay that they build this development at this location. So yeah, I think all of that falls within that, absolutely.
And I just add, not necessarily infill. In fact, just today I was on a call with a developer that does LIHTC work in the Dane County region. And this particular developer, and it's not the first time I've heard this, is looking at greenfield site development within some of the areas that we've identified for multifamily in the village's kind of growing spaces, not as much downtown redevelopment, greenfield.
Okay, but so I apologize. I thought that grocery stores and all of that played into it, and that given the location of the grocery stores, that it would be more likely to be infill. But I mean, I think that's fantastic, and I think that we should definitely support this type of this type of financing, mostly because if we're asking for money from outside of the village, it does become easier and it relieves some of the stress on our village coffers as we look potentially at some pretty challenging choices in these next couple of years, at least for an initial ask. As we, and I think as challenging as affordable housing can be, it may also be less of a fight that the village is having maybe less skin in the game.
Jason?
Go ahead, Jeff. Actually, Jeff had his hand up first.
Oh,
so
sorry.
I did. It certainly was a piece out of the task force. So the four of us that were on the task force clearly came away from those sessions, Kristen, where you brought different communities in to talk about the tools that were used. It certainly was something that the task force was also in favor of us exploring options with developers.
I guess for my edification, as we're talking about this, Todd and Kristen and Chris, as our leaders, how does this recommendation differ from that was delivered at the Housing Task Force?
Kristen, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know that it does differ from the task force. I think part of the process of taking the task force recommendations through the CDA is it's a consensus building process, which is, what a lot of local government is where we have a lot of different groups look at the recommendations, kind of weigh in on it, so that when we make decisions, we're guaranteeing that we have a representative portion of the community that has had a voice through their representatives to it. So that's what I see this as, or why we would make this recommendation.
Okay, so when we're making like the motion, it would be to adopt this recommendation as specified by the Housing Task Force.
I mean, we can. My thought is we sort of take a sense or a feel of the CDA item by item, and try to kind of summarize those then at the end, what this package is of actions. I'm taking notes as we go. Hope Nicole and Jason maybe are right there with me, but we'll summarize what we hear, and then we'll present sort of that package as we understand it, and try to get a thumbs up or down from you guys then with an official action on recommendation.
Okay, that sounds good. Sorry for getting a little in the weeds with the process.
Nope, it's all good. It's good to have communication and open discussions about all these things. So Jason, you had your hand up. I want to make sure I didn't skip you.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest, given that I think there's some items on this list that really require discussion, that there's a group of outside funding sources here that probably don't need a whole lot of discussion. So you've got a group of tax increment, of tax credit sources. There are some loan programs and grant programs, and you might be comfortable saying, yep, all that outside stuff, we're good with that. Let's move on.
So Jason, why don't you list those in a package for the CDA if you could?
Sure. Yeah. So there are the 3 different tax credit programs that funnel through WIDA, the 9% and the 4%, and then the 4% state tax credit program. There's the Dane County Affordable Housing Fund, and also the Dane County Home and CDBG funding. There's the Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program. There's the WEDC Brownfield Grant and Community Development Investment Grant, CDI grant program. And there's the Dane Workforce Housing Fund, which is a more recent addition here within Dane County. And thanks to Nicole for that list. That's her list. But I think all those are outside funds targeted to affordability that are, could be used in the community.
So the question is to the CDA, do any of you have a feeling on any of those programs that we ought not encourage it? I'm seeing consensus. Okay, all right.
So I would actually just ask one question, Todd, and maybe Nicole and Jason can pipe in here. So as we've gone through several of our projects that are larger projects, the 4% tax credit, it's designed to support larger projects. Can you define what larger project means for us?
Yeah, and I would say that is in general. There are small 4% projects. They just, they require a lot of other gap financing sources. Usually for a straight 4%, I'd say around 100 units, maybe more.
Okay.
Again, Chris, I go back to my point. Wouldn't we be allowing wouldn't the plan commission be looking for the developer to find that best method and then come and talk about what's needed from the village?
I'm actually in agreement with you completely, Jeff. I just wanted to see if there was a definition for what was a larger project versus a smaller project for these. So
and Jeff, I'll agree with you again. What this is basically doing is what staff's going to do from this is, again, with board support, is we're gonna, I guess I should say, we're gonna splash this more on our economic development website. When I approach developers, sometimes I have impromptu meetings, or I'm at conferences where we rub elbows and bump into one another. Not these days, but it's sort of more frontal lobe as opposed to just waiting to see what somebody brings to us. We're going to be right there and say, we're here ready to listen.
All right, that said, is there anybody who's opposed to this? Please put your thumb down. I guess we'll do that. All right, so I'm seeing thumbs up across the board. Yes. Yes. All right, thumbs across the board. All right, so we're good there. Moving on, let's move. We're rolling tonight. Look at that. That's less than 20 minutes in. We've got a decision made. I think that might be a record for our group. So let's go.
All right. Perhaps maybe TIF was next on my list, but maybe we could tackle that one last, since it kind of ties into the next conversation as well. It might be a longer discussion. So we had talked about, there is always the option, and I think this is challenging in a number of ways, but we talked about the village and or the CDA could acquire and own and even operate, if they chose to, affordable housing and issue an RFP to developers. Some larger communities do that. But there are, of course, a lot of challenges with that, budget implications. You know, the village would be getting into kind of a more development role. So thoughts on that, or if anyone wants to explore this further?
I'm going to hold my comments on this one because I do have a fairly strong opinion on this one. I don't want to influence any of you based on my position. So I'm going to let you guys all go first on this one. Go ahead, Ann.
I'll kick off. I think right now, with our relative naivete around implementing and executing and knowing how to manage affordable housing very well in this village and knowing what to look for, I think that is something that we might strive for in the future. But I think right now for implementation, that is challenging. And I think it would be biting off more than we can chew.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Others? David, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I don't think we possess the expertise to put it together. You know, we're looking at this on a part-time basis, and you know, that's a full-time industry, and the financing of it is always complicated, and I don't see us pursuing that anytime in the near future. I think the village has enough on its plate without trying to manage properties.
Okay, thanks, David. Kristen, how about you?
I think those are consistent with mine, like in the future, possibly, but right now, let's build some skill.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, I don't have to give my huge staunch opinion on this one then, because I'm really in the same boat as you guys. I would just say that the biggest advantage I see with it is control that you have if you're doing it yourselves, and what's going to go in there, what's not going to. And depending on who your board is at the time, you're going to see that control may differ. Because if you purchase things and it sits because your control is to the point where it makes it prohibitive for anybody coming in, that doesn't work. And then you can get too lax, and then you get something you might not necessarily want. So I think it's just going to depend on who the board is at the time. And as all of you are pointing out, our expertise is not that great. So maybe that's something we can look at from a committee level CDA with staff. Maybe we would even have to hire a staff member if we were going to get to that point. I would assume we probably would at that point if we were going to go down that road.
Is it worth, Chris, us hearing from Todd and Jason on what the capacity of the staff or what it would take?
Yeah, we don't generally listen to them anyways, but I'm kidding. Sure, absolutely, Jeff. I was kidding. Jeff's face was like, what? Yes, I think you're absolutely right to ask for what their opinions are. Go ahead. I'm going to let Jason go first.
Oh, okay.
How's that, Todd? Go ahead,
I get the
Jason.
last word on that. I think it's going to be a long time or never that you develop yourselves or operate housing yourselves. But using the CDA as a tool to acquire land, at least for the land aggregation purpose on a desired redevelopment site, and or to hold the land long enough to put out a developer RFP and to, as Chris, as you were indicating, to have some control over what's proposed, and then to hand it off to a developer whose proposal you like. I think that is something in a more near-term horizon. It seems feasible to me for the village to undertake.
Thanks, Jason. Todd, go ahead.
I mean, feasible if you have the developer there to immediately swap. And I bring that up because we don't have a dollar source for something like that on a long hold basis. Some communities, and I have experience with this, have had built into bigger TIF districts some elements of housing as a component, and the funding source was larger projects within the TIF district that provided increment to then take on this housing initiative. Or communities have had success with the affordable housing extension and have started to build a fund, or communities have had the advantage of a CDBG revolving loan program that has perpetuated a perpetual funding source to a program. We have none of the three. So for the reasons you stated, as well as the funding limitation, I'm in complete agreement.
Perfect. Any other comments on this one? Another record-setting time. Moving on, Nicole.
All right. The next one to tackle is impact or park or other fees that developers pay on new construction developments. So there are a lot of communities that either waive these on a pro rata basis based on the number of affordable units versus total units, or provide a discount to those fees for affordable units. And affordable could also be defined at a certain level. A lot of communities seem to use the 60% AMI because they're pairing it with other sources. But those are the options there for you to consider.
Comments?
I'd just throw in maybe, Chris, a touch of context to
Go
the
ahead.
village's experience in that area. The village board has held developers' feet to the fire on that. I would admit that every large residential project that's come our way, multifamily, has asked for some sort of deal on this. Why? Because it's a huge sticker. It's a big sticker price. But the board's position has been relatively consistent in that all these units, whether it's single family or multifamily, are bringing to us users who enjoy the facilities. Therefore, they've held to that, even with at home again. Remember, Chris?
Yep.
I don't know, Jason, if you were on board with this then, but we that was a touchy one, and they were frankly, they got pretty upset about the position we took, but the board held pretty tight to those expectations. So that's just a little bit of background on what I've experienced with our board currently.
Yeah, from impact fees perspective, I would say that I did have a resident. Now, this is one resident in our community, and it'll be interesting to hear your reaction, what I'm about to say, because I was kind of speechless. So we're talking about affordable housing. His concern was, we're growing too fast. We need to put a $10,000 impact fee on every house lot that comes in for those people to help us pay for our parks and everything that they're going to come in and enjoy. Now, I don't think that's going to help us from the affordability standpoint if we put that on the developer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are with regards to this. He was more concerned about our speed of growth and people coming in and using all the things that all the people that have been here forever have paid for. So he was one of that crowd of David and I, as old timers of the community, that had that concern. So
Not
impact
legal.
fees, what's that?
I'll just say not legal.
And I'm not saying it's I'm just stating what was stated to me about this. You'd have to tie it to something, I believe, in my conversations that I briefly had with Brian Kleinmeyer about it. So anyway, that's another type of impact fee that could happen, I suppose, in some remote way. But I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts about this? Go ahead, Ann.
I'll jump in with an unpopular opinion, that if what we're doing is leveling impact fees and then providing TIF financing, right? I don't see that is really a net gain for us, because there are expenses to go on with creating a TIF district and the expenses with all of that. So I think that if we are going to attach TIF to these projects, it's reasonable to consider whether or not removing or reducing the impact fees would be another source of funding that the village could use in lieu of TIF.
Okay. David?
I think the parks fees attaching to lots, etc., are a direct correlation. You're bringing in people and you're bringing in users, and it makes a lot of sense. And I don't think you should be stealing from one pot to the other, because you're just going to end up being short than on the original pot. And I think you get a lot less objection to targeted fees when people can see the results. And I don't even know what the number count in our parks is, but it's a lot more than most people have any idea that we have in the village. But with that growth, as the person said, we're growing so much. That's right. But each one of those, as it grows, is producing fees that help us to develop those parks. And I think that fund should be left alone for its purpose.
I would agree with that. I understand when you look at how much it costs, I understand the thought, well, could we waive that and make things a little bit more affordable? But over, not just the 15, 20, 30 year of a life of a project, but these buildings we hope are standing for 50, 75 years. And we hope the amenities surrounding those buildings and in the village are going to be available at the same level for people, regardless of where they happen to locate in the village. So the strong park system accessible to all, that's well maintained, I think is part of a basic lifestyle, regardless of income.
Jeff, any comments for this one?
No, my only experience was building our facility and getting a kind of in my face education around park fees, and ended up rationalizing that to myself that that's a good contribution that a developer ought to make to the community. So I think I'm with David. I really don't think we want to mess with that plan.
Perfect. I actually had a resident in the last month ask me how much it costs to use the parks, which was an interesting one to me, because I said, well, they're all free. The pools are different. That's a totally different topic, but pools, parks, all are free. Everybody's there to use for. Doesn't matter what part of town you live in, you can use any of the parks. She was delighted about that. So I don't know what other communities do. She was relatively new to the community, so maybe that's a common thing for communities. Is it that they would charge to use a park, a public park? That was weird to me, but all right. So I think
my brother lives in the UK and they have private parks, and there were a few private parks in Atlanta where we lived too, where it was a neighborhood that owned the plot of land.
Huh, interesting. Okay. Very good. So Todd, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was gonna. I'm hearing hesitancy about the notion of fee reductions. Since we have somebody here who with Cohen Esri here watching, would it be okay if I just ask Brian or someone from his team if they have seen communities in their experience from pursuing affordable projects that have relaxed standards on impact fees? Is that okay, Chris?
Sure, I can choose to let them in, but I'm one that likes to allow others to have input. So if anybody objects right now for them having an opinion, please raise your hand. All right, everybody seems good. So yes, you can allow them in, Todd,
Okay.
if they want to
All right,
participate.
all right, Brian. Yeah, Brian raised his hand. Brian, what's your experience?
Hi there. This is a fascinating discussion, and it's a world I've been in for 20 years. Part of my background, I was Director of Planning and Economic Development for the city of St. Paul up here for several years. And everything you've talked about, you know, most cities have some form of them. We actually won a second award this spring in Sun Prairie, and we did a 4% federal and 4% state award, and it is for a bigger project. You know, we are involved in a project in Mankato where we got TIF, CDBG, as well as waiving the fees for, you know, for permitting and construction.
Let me just kind of cutting to the chase a bit, Brian. Sorry, but when for how often, by percentage, do your projects have some sort of fee waiver or partial reduction because they are an affordable product?
Yeah, maybe 40%.
About 40%. Okay, that helps, Brian. Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions for Brian on that particular topic?
Dan, go ahead.
Is there do you see adverse impacts from that, or how else do you make up the money required to meet the impact fees?
I'm sorry, adverse impact
So-
on.
So if you are developing a project and it's community of Wanakee that is choosing, I think in this instance, to not develop or waive those impact fees from my understanding, and say it's community B who does, what changes does that do to your pro forma?
Yeah, so we wouldn't, I mean, obviously, if it was one of the asks and it wasn't available, it wasn't available. And, you know, you have to make it up some other way. So.
Okay, so it's not going to scare
Generally
people away.
wouldn't be a, you know, a deal killer type of a deal. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you, Brian. I'm probably strong in this one as far as not giving out waivers for the impact fees for our parks. I don't like to do that. All of our residents have the ability to use the parks. People who are coming in new are more than likely going to use the parks in some way, shape, or form at some point. Maybe they're not, maybe they don't, but it is something that is universal and as I said, free to the public to use at any time. So I'm not one that probably would be in favor of that, in my opinion. Now, do we want to have flexibility with it though? Could there be a circumstance that would allow for it? Maybe. I don't know what that is right now, but maybe there'd be a circumstance we could look at.
The board did sort of meet halfway with that home again. I don't recall, Jeff, with your development where we landed, but the truth of the matter was that their residents generally don't leave and walk around village facilities. They're relatively more immobile. So that was the argument for assisted living, that it wasn't as reasonable on the full fee. And Jeff, do you recall where we landed on yours?
I think I wrote on their coattails. They were ahead of me and I wrote on their coattails and I think you reduced it.
But it was like a proportionate reduction of some sort. Right.
Because
Okay.
again, they're going on our patios about as far outside as they get.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this discussion quite clearly, and I think we'll say the committee at that time, or board, I'm not even sure which one would made this decision, probably the board, was that the folks in Jeff's establishment, the folks at home, probably aren't the ones that are going to go use it, but they still do have family members coming into the community to visit them that may go to the park next door. Jeff's facility is now going to have a park technically right next door with the paths and the things that are going into, I'm not sure what we call that park yet, but the new Arboretum subdivision woods that are over there. I think that's why we justified, all right, well, maybe we can reduce it for their types of facilities, that those folks will not be going out into the parks, but they may have family members visiting that wood. So Jeff, do you recall it kind of like that way too? I'm pretty sure that's how that went
Yeah,
down.
it wasn't that detailed of a discussion, Chris. It was a reduction in the fees.
Yeah.
And I didn't dispute it. We just paid it.
Okay. All right. Do you need any more direction on this one, Todd? I think.
I sensed most comments were towards not putting in place an impact fee waiver program, although I hear some talk about being flexible when appropriate, is what I gathered. Now, Ann brought up the notion of TIF, or if not TIF, then maybe more amenable to a waiver.
And
But I didn't.
I'd just add in that, looking at the park fees that the village has, it's certainly not even close to the highest I've seen among communities. So I don't think that keeping them in place and not waiving them is, as Brian alluded to, it's not, making a project a no-go just based on that.
That seems
So-
reasonable to me. I guess the other one that I do wonder a little bit about that is levied, and I am not sure how we tie it as directly to improvements that are happening to serve the needs of new residents as the village center.
And I'm trying to remember the village center fees. I believe those, do those get applied to multifamily? I don't recall.
We paid the
Did you
full
pay those,
fee on I believe we paid the full fee on the village center.
And that's not as substantial by far
Right.
than the park fees.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we've got some information we can package, but I do want to suggest that we jump to TIF. You might have other things, and that's because Todd Taves is with us from Ellers. He has to leave at 7. I remembered that, Todd. You're probably wanting to send me a note here, but can we touch base on the TIF alternatives and then get some feedback from Todd on that? Nicole, if you want to go ahead.
So, the two kind of TIF options that we talked about for affordable housing developments would be one, a project-specific TIF loan. So a project within a larger TIF district getting probably as a pay-as-you-go TIF based on the actual increment for that development. And then the second option would be utilizing the TIF extension for affordable housing funds as allowed under state statute and applying those funds throughout the village to one specific project or to a number of programs or projects.
Todd Taves, would you mind diving in a bit further on those two items just to offer some context to the CDA and how they can be used for affordable housing?
Mm-hmm. Sure, and I mean, this really dovetails right into the next item because the two options for this project are exactly that. It's a single site TID with a loan that would either be funded by the village or could be done on a pay-as-you-go basis, or would be utilization of the affordable housing extension, as the village does have a TID. You could contemplate closing in the very near future. I think, as I mentioned to this group a few months ago, that affordable housing extension, we're really just starting to see that come into play, I would say, in the last 3 to 5 years, partly because I think that law wasn't fully on everyone's radar until more recently, but also just as a fact that, it took some time following passage of the law for people to actually have kids that were in a position to take advantage of that. So, with regard to the former, the TIF option, it is extremely common. In fact, I would say, more often than not, when you have a affordable project, they're going to look for TIF as one of the sources to help, fill the gap. And while I'm not extremely well versed in the actual application process, it is my understanding that having that TIF support is one of the aspects that will help a project score better and secure tax credit. So, very common tool, and usually is, again, single site and very often pay as you go. So very common tool, and I would expect that's something you'll want to have in your repertoire of things you might consider in appropriate situations.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Todd? Or comments regarding? Todd, are we looking for Todd Schmidt, are we looking for like a thumbs up on whether or not we want to use TIF, or what are you looking for here?
I think the thing I'd say about TIF is it's on the table because it's a matter of state law. And I'll mention that what the board has done is taken a very flexible approach to TIF use. I'd call it a project by project basis approach to be as flexible as possible and when needed. So in the case though of affordable housing, I wonder, just for context, and since you got to leave, Todd, this can give the CDA a little to think about when we talk about Cohen-Esri. Can you talk a bit about the affordable housing extension and the scenario that we've laid out related, in this case, particularly to Cohen-Esri, but you can contemplate any affordable housing project for that matter. But can you show us how actually that functions? How does that work? How can that build a batch of dollars for affordable housing purposes?
The TID closure option?
Yeah, the TID closure option.
So what happens is when you get to the point that a tax increment district can close, either because it's reached its maximum life or it's recovered its project costs, the village board has the opportunity to adopt a simple resolution. There's no other approvals required as far as the joint review board. You send that to the Department of Revenue, and they will then automatically extend it 1 year. And what happens is you then collect one more tax collection cycle. For example, the TID that we are looking at closing, we would expect that you'll collect about $435,000 this year. So using that example, TID 2, you'd in the year following closure have $435,000 that you could put in that fund and use for anything that involves improving housing stock. And the further stipulation is that at least 75% of the total dollars have to be used for affordable housing, which is defined as housing that costs no more than 30% of the household's gross income. And the biggest thing is the village has a fair number of TIDs, but they generally, the closings, you've got to kind of plan for when those are expected to occur, so you have an understanding of when that cash may become available, and then how you might program or use that to support your initiatives.
In thinking about other communities, Todd, have you seen most communities just consider that on again, TID by TID basis, or have some communities simply made it a policy whenever feasible, they're going to enact the 1 year extension to build a fund for affordable housing purposes? Has any community done that?
Made it a policy that they would always do it. I've not seen that as a formal policy. I would say that we're definitely seeing a trend where communities are looking to take advantage of that. But obviously it's depending on the circumstances. Some elected bodies, if they don't perceive a need, every community is different. They may want to close that TID sooner rather than later to get the benefits in terms of reducing the tax rate. But it's become very prevalent in the last few years.
So let's say there's no Co-Nesri project here. There's no project at hand. Are there communities in those cases still approving an affordable housing extension just to establish a fund for whatever might come?
There are, and one caveat though is you do have to, in the resolution extending the TID, at least in some generalized terms, articulate what the intended purpose of the funds are for. Some communities that have been doing this for a while have well-established programs. So maybe rather than supporting a particular affordable project, what they may do is make loans available for first-time home buyers, for renovating both owner-occupied and rental housing, a variety of different programs that they may use this as a funding source on an ongoing basis. So you'd have to have some reasonable explanation of what you intended to do with the funds if there wasn't a project in hand, so to speak.
So Todd, I want to make sure I heard that right. So first-time home buyer would be eligible potentially within these funds?
The only stipulation in the statute is that the housing cannot cost more than 30% of the household's gross income. That's the only requirement in the statute.
Okay, thank you.
So my question becomes one of, when we look at extending these TIFs, are they generally exhausted, or is it because they're potentially ending early? Because I look at it and say, if I tell the school district and the county, et cetera, that I'm going to put this TIF in place for 20 years, and now I want to make it 22, I'm reneging on a promise that I made to them. If you have a TIF that is paying itself early, that's a little different story, because, again, I say, you told the school district, and they're the biggest one that loses on that, because they're, and they have a budget to run also. But if you tell them, we're going to hold back, you're not going to get this tax increment until this TIF is done, and you can count on it in year 20, that's fine. Now, if you can build something because that TIF was successful, then I see, being able to take those funds and use them elsewhere. Just my thought.
Todd, did you want to make a comment? You look like you wanted to make a comment, but you didn't. Todd Taves.
I wasn't sure if you were looking for a comment. I was just going to reply by indicating that each of the villages TIDs is in a different position, but by and large, most of the districts are expected to close well before the end of their maximum life. So if this was something the village would want to do going forward, in most cases you're not adding a year onto the end of what would already be the maximum life. One thing too is there's a requirement that the Joint Review Board meet annually. And while there is no requirement for the Joint Review Board to approve this, we certainly, would be of the point of view, and I know, Todd, you are as well, that we want to be forthcoming with, the plans so that, they at least can understand what the village's intentions would be and provide some, if not formal, informal input onto that.
Todd Schmidt, have you had any conversations with Steve Summers at all over at the school in regards to this? I can appreciate Dave's comment where they're expecting at a certain point that the TIDs are going to close and that the revenues are going to get shifted around. We all know that with the revenue sharing and things with the state that all get factored in too, but have you talked to Steve at all?
Yeah, we've had Steve with us at the past couple of Joint Review Board meetings, and I made it a really clear point at our last JRB when we reviewed the audits that this potential, the consideration of the affordable housing extension, is something that's in the village's frame of mind, and that it's something that we wanted the district to be aware of. Have I dug it deep in regarding this particular one? I think besides. No, we haven't dug deep into this particular one, Chris.
So it might not be a bad idea is what I'm getting at for us, especially with what we're talking about with Cohen Ezra. If we're going to extend a TID life right now, they may be looking at their 2-year out budget. And if this is going to have a significant impact there, we should consider that as well.
Well, the impact is a little more interesting regarding this particular application. And Todd can maybe spend just a moment explaining it. Currently, Todd, I'm just going to let you take it over. Talking about how our donor scenario with 2 and 5.
Sure. So TID number 2 has recovered all of its project costs. The only reason it remains open is to serve as a donor to TID 5, which is one of the downtown TIDs. And so as it stands right now, TID number 2 would stay open its full life, which would mean it would not close until 2024. The scenario that we are looking at most likely would be closing that district after April 15th of next year. And that would actually, it would do 2 things. Number one is it would make the affordable housing funds available to the village in January of 2022. And it would also end up actually closing TID number 2 years earlier than we've advised the school district in past meetings. The implication for TID 5 is it would have 2 years less of dollars being shuttled over from TID number 2, but it still would close by 2027 with the increment it is bringing in. So it slows down that TID's closure a little bit, but it still would be expected to have a positive outcome before the end of its maximum life.
And this was all in your packet too, everybody. It's I don't know which number it is in the thing, but
Yeah, I want to make sure while we have Todd Taves with us as our expert, make sure that everybody is pretty clear on sort of this proposed design. I know we're jumping ahead to Cohen Ezra, but I wanted to get Todd in here before he has to scoot.
So
What's the machination that allows you to move money from one TID to the other?
Any district can be a donor, provided that it is still that you approve the amendment allowing it to be a donor before the end of its expenditure period. Expenditure period is a term that is 5 years earlier than the district's maximum life. So you've got to make the decision before then. And you have to be in a position where you're bringing in more cash than you need to pay your own costs. The recipient district has to be a district that was created on the basis of being a blighted area or a district in need of a rehabilitation or conservation. So an industrial district cannot receive shared funds, nor can a mixed use district.
And the history for us, David, was the village invested heavily in some of the redevelopment, acquisition and demolition in our downtown just before recession. Recession hit, development activity tanked, and that district went into the red real quick. So this was a solution that the Joint Review Board agreed with back, well, eight years ago now, I think. The good news story is that TID 5 has rebounded and can stand on its own, fortunately, which puts us in a position to suggest what we are today. I think if it was still 5, 6, 7 years ago, we wouldn't be able to suggest this.
Okay.
So Todd, if I'm understanding correctly, the donor TIF amendment does run through the Joint Review Board. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, yes. Okay.
okay. Any other questions for Todd Taves from anyone? Todd, we have a bunch of experts now. Thank you.
I have one question, if that's all right.
Okay, go ahead.
In terms of the options that you laid out in your memo about when you could close TID 2, either with this year or next year with the extension, is there a window of time that the village has to make that decision in terms of if they liked the option number 2 or the option of closing TID number 2 next year instead of this year? Can they adopt that resolution, say now, or do you have to do it within a certain number of months of the the closure.
The relevant date is April 15th of each year. That the reason for that is that's simply the date annually that you have to tell the Department of Revenue whether to certify a tax increment for that calendar year. From a practical standpoint, based on a discussion with the staff and at the village board meeting, what would have to occur here is the decision or the action would be after April 15th of 2021.
Okay.
There were some financial considerations that would be disadvantageous to do it before then, but it could be done right after April 15th. So you would be adopting a resolution to close the district and concurrently adopting a resolution to extend the life for 1 year for affordable housing that would become part of the 21 levy collectible 22.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, Todd, what you were looking for with the attachment, what were you looking for with this evening for any decisions from us on this, or?
Well, I think trying to understand comfort level with TIF utilization for affordable housing. I mean, perhaps someone would say, I don't think we should create new districts for the sole purpose of affordable housing project development. That's a reasonable position that you might want to take. Or you might want to say, hey, village, put together a policy or a program, or yeah, maybe a policy statement on what might be appropriate for using the affordable housing extension program. Those are a couple directions that you could direct village staff to work on.
How are people feeling about those options or others that you may have? Go ahead, Ann.
I think to build on what Dave said, if the TIFs are closing early before their statutory guidance, I think it's very reasonable to use an extension for 1 year versus building new TIFs that could take, it looked like perhaps as many as 10 years to pay their cost. But I would also like to see that, particularly on new developments, be utilized with other outside funding sources rather than just relying on the village whenever possible, so that we can stretch that money and make it go farther.
Okay. Any other comments? Jeff? Oh, sorry, Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, I like the use of TIF and TID and extending a year for affordable housing. I like the idea of making it more or less standard so that we can build up a cash reserve. And if we do want to do a land acquisition or something like that, then we've got the money without trying to scrounge it from some other, fund that needs it. So I like those two things actually quite a lot.
Do you like Ann's point, Kristen?
Pardon?
Do you like Ann's point about not doing that in the case of a TIF that has reached its statutory end of life?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good compromise. We know that we've got, a lot of pushback about TIF and TID in the village. And I feel like that might make people uncomfortable, where extending one that is going to close before it was planned to close before the end of its life is kind of a nice way of splitting the difference. And I don't know that we're going to have, when I look at the TIFs and TIDs now, it feels like it's unusual to go to the end of the statutory life too. So I don't know that we're going to be giving up that many opportunities to help fund affordable housing. Could be wrong. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, but yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, David? No? Okay, Jeff, no, okay.
I will say maybe just to echo Chris, that Chris and I got an email from Al Dassow, couldn't be here. He was, I guess I could share it, generally negative about the thought of TIF as a tool in any means for affordable housing support. Anyway, that I responded with some clarifications to his questions. I didn't get a response back yet. He's out of town, but he is on the side of not as supportive of TIF use for affordable.
That seems surprising, given his previous comments about that. So it's a shame that he's not here to help us understand where he's coming from.
I think I said the same thing to Chris, didn't I? That I was a little surprised as well, but
I think we both had a little bit of a shock in our situation when that came through.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Okay, and just for the record, Todd, I was really just building off of Dave's suggestion that we not go beyond the statutory limits there. So
Right.
not anything smart. It's all Dave.
Yep.
I don't think, and I know Todd Taves is gone. Jason, you may be able to help with this. I don't think we're ever going to create a TIF or TID district in order to have affordable housing at the end of it. Is that? I don't, at least that's not how I'm going to view it ever, as I've gone through this, that it's something that's available to us. And I think that's going to be a case by case. And as Ann and David both, I agree with it. You know, those that are closing early and have done really well. Okay. Those that struggle, make it to the end of their life, hopefully in the good way, probably not the right ones to use it from. So I think we have kind of a pretty good consensus there with what we talked about. Jeff was the only one that was quiet, but I think he's okay. Yes.
Right, that's good.
Okay.
Good feedback. I think we can work with that. Thank you.
Okay. Next, are we ready to move on? Yes. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, Nicole's on mute.
Yeah. I think we're ready to move on to the discussion of the Cohen Esri development and request. I want to make sure that has enough time for a good discussion.
Did you get through all the tools? Did we touch on them all?
Yes, we did. I have notes, and I appreciate all of the input on that. It was great to hear.
Okay, I had offered to do sort of a package of what you all suggested, but I think as we went, I felt like we heard your consensus. I think we agreed on all that, and I'm comfortable if the CDA is with directing staff to assemble those recommendations forward then to the village board.
Todd, quick question on that. Before those go to the board, are you planning to do that right away, or would it make sense to bring those recommendations back to make sure everybody's good with what you've got down on paper before they get to the board?
I can do either.
I'm just trying to make sure.
I can do either, Chris. CDA's preference.
So how does people feel about that? I mean, we've given them information and direction, which is great. But if you'd like to see what actually is going to go to the board, we would need to see that the next meeting.
Well, and I think I recall that we're going to rule with a vote, but it sure seems like giving Al and Jeff an opportunity to view that before we just send it off to the board, I think is appropriate.
I remember, I like what you're saying with that, Jeff, but I do remember when I was playing sports, if I didn't show up for the game, I didn't score, and I generally didn't do anything productive for the team. So just putting it out there.
And I think I agree that I think our rules are if we've got a majority vote, and we would have a majority vote if 4 of us agree, 5 of us agreed.
Yeah, with that said, the best decisions are always made slowly and deliberately. So, and we're not up against anything necessarily. I think we could have this as a real quick action item on your agenda, kind of kick it out of the way right away, and then get into the next scope of work with Nicole.
Yeah, it gives everybody a very good, clear view of what it is that's going to the board. You see it in writing, what the board's going to see, and to make sure that if something's there that you didn't think was what we agreed upon, this is our time to correct that. So I think we wait until the next meeting. You guys can bring that back to us and go. Does anybody agree with that? If you do, raise your hand.
No, as long as we're not disrupting any timelines for any projects, I'm happy to review this again in January.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys. Then let's go on to our last item. I believe it's our last item.
And I'm going to bring in Brent, Brian, and Ryan. There's one other person as an attendee, TMIN 0419. If that person is also part of Brian's crew, if you could raise your hand, I'll bring you in as well. I see that they are. Okay, I took care of bringing everyone in here. All right, so I did a good 15-minute video memo with these guys last week to give you a background on the project. We just touched on it conceptually at your meeting a month ago, and there's a whole bunch of information in your packet identical to what I sent you just a week after your last meeting. So I'm guessing that you guys are pretty well up to speed on the project. Chris, do you want Brian maybe to fill everyone in on exactly where they're at this moment, or is everybody familiar with where they're at?
I watched the video. I reviewed the materials. I was in our plan commission meeting last night. We talked about the project as well there. So I feel that I have great knowledge. I'll put it out to the committee members. If you would like a little review from Brian, that would be fine too. So anybody looking, I'm looking for heads right now, and I'm not seeing a lot of people going, oh yeah, we want to see more.
If we can do a short review, because I was not able to access that video.
Okay, sounds good. Brian, go ahead.
Brian, if you can give us a short, I've read the material, but I missed the conversation.
Sure. So on April 28th, Cohen Redevelopment Group received a LIHTC award from WIDA for 701 West Main for 50 units. At the time, we felt we had a sufficient budget to be able to move this project forward. Since then, we kind of had a couple of hits on our project, on our finance model. One was that in our negotiation with city staff and consultants this summer, they just felt that 701 West Main was not big enough to accommodate the 50 units and everything associated with it. So they encouraged us to go out and purchase 705 West Main Street, and we have a purchase agreement with them that has added approximately $450,000 to the project. Secondly, we had submitted a application to the Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Fund. That was one of the items that Nicole outlined as a funding source. And interestingly, you cannot make that submission to Federal Home Loan Bank until after you've received a WIDA award. So you include it in your budget to submit to WIDA, even though you don't have it in hand. We weren't alone doing that. Most other developers did that as well. We have gotten several Federal Home Loan Bank awards, and we know how to do those submissions. We didn't get it on a technicality, and that was a $600,000 hit. And further, since kind of a third piece, since COVID started, there's been an impact on the tax credit market, where we're probably down an additional 150,000 from what we had projected based on the pricing, tax credit pricing back in when we submitted the award. And we don't even have to get into lumber doubling, et cetera. We did share our pro forma with staff, our sources and uses. And I want to say one of the first things we did was we cut our development fee literally 63% from what WIDA would allows or kind of outlines what the development fee would be in order to keep this rolling. I mean, that is the most we could have possibly eliminated from our development fee by WIDA's rules and regulations, as well as financing. So I kind of stressed that part of it. So that's why we began a discussion with Todd. And Todd, we go back a couple of years. In every discussion we had, I would talk about the different funding sources that you just talked about. And Todd was very straightforward and upfront and just said, you know, most of those are challenges, including the TIF, you know, and we heard him, but when we submitted this application, we felt we had with, you know, the difference of that $1 million kind of gulf from our original financial model. So that's kind of where we're at as a project. And we have, you know, we plan on closing on the properties in late March. So we do feel some challenges and some time constraint regarding that. I do have Brent Shipper and Ryan Carter here. Last night at the plan committee, they are architects. Last night at the plan commission, we spent a lot of time talking about the evolution of the product that Jason and Ed, you know, really were great partners and great advisors, and how we thought they could improve the product. And I don't know, Todd, if that's something you'd want Brent and Ryan to spend 2 minutes on, 3 minutes on, not the 40 minutes we had last night. So your call.
Yeah, I'm guessing that this group would appreciate maybe having a little context feel to what they're talking about, visual.
Brent, go ahead. You got to mute yourself, Brent.
Unmute.
So, oh, Ryan, we're sharing your screen. I was going to share my screen. Ryan, is your screen up?
I took it down.
Oh, okay. Well, let me share my screen. Well, it's not allowing that, Ryan. I guess you need to share yours now.
You'll have to turn yours off.
It's called stop share if you're not familiar.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of the screen. If you can stop sharing, that would be really helpful. So
All right, are y'all seeing that?
We are seeing something.
It's a screen with a pink banner across the top. Looks like an internet page. There we go.
All right. And Brent, are you still on the call or?
Yeah, Ryan, I'm still here.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. So Ryan, can we start at a site plan so everyone can see the site plan?
There you go.
So just so that everybody understands, the original site was about half of this site. And what we have done is, like Brian said, purchase the site next to it. And we now have our 50 units all on a Main Street face, and all the parking on the rear side. The other issue that happened, I'd like to say happened to us, was the site that we are purchasing to enlarge our site has even more wetlands on it than our original site. So that is why you see this a little bit wonky parking lot. We are required to stay 75 feet back from the wetlands behind us. So what you see us doing on this site is building it out to the maximum that we can as far as how we're handling parking. What we are doing for the 50 units of building, the 50 units of building is approximately 8 3-bedroom units, 22 2-bedrooms, and 21 bedrooms, I believe, near that. The 3-bedroom units are all on the ground floor, and WIDA has a rule with ground floor entries to 3-bedroom units, thinking those are more family units. And so those are all ground floor entries, and there's a playground area that's also part of the site. So when we went to design this building, and we realized that because of the wetlands, the building would all be forced towards the front of the site, we started to look at how we could break down the scale of the building and how to give it a character that was more like some of the other buildings as you go down Main Street into the village, and break down the scale. So if we go to the elevations, there are the 2 lowest elevations called South Proposed and South Added Funds. As we went through the site plan review with the village, there were things that staff wanted to see as upgrades to these elevations that I do think improve the elevations. We do add dollars, and like Brian said, when we were in this process, we were $1 million down. But what we did is, and I hope everyone can see from the proposed to the added, from the original design, we were really trying to do a building that gave identity to individuals that were living here, had a scale that was appropriate for Main Street, and what we even to the point of not even breaking it down in bays and different heights at the parapet, but even different windows and window sizes. So if you look at some of the things that are even going on around us, I think that the scale of our building is a lot more walkable than some of the things in our near environment, even the McDonald's next to us. But what we did for the added funds on the south side is we added balconies, we added some more parapet heights, we added some additional lighting and some additional overhangs at the entries. And I think on the Main Street side, the staff was always thought we were pretty close. On the side that is viewed from the Piggly Wiggly and the side that looks out over the wetlands, the staff really wanted us to work on that a little bit. And so what we did on that is the lower image is our original, the upper is our enhanced. And again, we we added more windows, we added balcony railings, and these are Juliet balconies. I don't want anyone to think that we simply can't add full balconies and remain in our budget, because we're already adding to the cost of the building with what we're doing. And we added brick around the entry points. So there's a lot of changes that we made as we worked with staff, and we added more dollars to our budget. So I think that's one of the reasons that we're here talking about different ways of helping the project, is that what Brian talked about, we were $1 million down from where we started when we started the project in April. And we've added some dollars to make it the best project we can for the village. So is there questions about what you're seeing here? Was that a good synopsis? And Ryan, do you want to show the slides on the, yes, thank you. These are some views that you would see. The top view going east into the village. You see a little bit about how we're breaking up the facade with different materials, different parapet heights, and actually changing the depth of the building so that we get some enhanced shadow lines. The view here, you see what it would look like going out of town. Just to your right would be the McDonald's and the McDonald's parking lot, and you're headed west out of the village. And a little bit more of straight on view of to show you the rhythm that we're trying to create. Now, I will say that these model images do not have all the trees in them and do not have all the sidewalks in them. They're just to show some massing. And Ryan, if you could show the materials page. So the idea on the materials is that we are using some standard hardy plank siding and some standard colors in the grays and neutral. And then on the front side, we have areas where we're using a burgundy brick, a common red brick. And then on the back side, we're using an ebonite velour brick that is a dark gray, just so that we want the project to be seen as a place that people want to live from the front and the back. But we believe that a Main Street facade should be differentiated from the rear in some ways. Not quality, but there's a different look.
All right, folks. So we can go a little bit long tonight, but we kind of have a rule at this committee that we get finished at 7:30. Not that I'm not trying to push you guys, but I want to give the opportunity for the committee people to have questions for all of you. So is there anything else that the committee would want to see? I know, Kristen, you were in a meeting last night that we saw the information. So really this goes to Jeff and Ann and David for questions.
If I could, Chris, I want to encourage the CDA to resist the urge to critique the design. That is in front of the Plan Commission, not your task. What I did definitely want you to have a perception of what the building was going to look and feel like at this point. So that's why we went through that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
How do you, we talked somewhere early in the discussion about affordability. How are you defining affordability? Brian, I think this probably was yours. How are you defining affordability in your design and what you're looking for?
Well, by definition, whether it's 30% median income, 50% median income, 60% median income, the HUD goal is to have no more than 30% of your income going toward the rent.
In all of the units?
In all of the units. However, so there are 50 units, 10 of them are market rate units. 10 of them are at 30% median income, 20 are at 50% median income, and 10 at 60% median income. So 40 out of the 50 units, if you look at what 40 out of the 50 units are over 50% median income, with 10 of those being market rate. And the income for a couple and a child at 50% median income is $50,000. So this is a workforce housing project, an affordable workforce housing project.
Thank you.
Ann, any questions?
Actually, I do. You guys on the development side will have picked up that I loathe to spend the village's money when we can spend other people's money. And so my thought is that an extension of TIF might be applicable, but I would like to see an application to the Dane County Housing Fund if that's not already happened. If that is the recommendation of this committee, does that disrupt your process? That if that is not approved, that you would receive the TIF?
Go ahead, Brian. Yep, go ahead, Brian.
So the Dane County Affordable Housing Fund, I think the cycle is application in spring, but you wouldn't know until late summer. And so that would disrupt our timing, but more importantly, it would change the blend of the units you have to have in the Dane County Housing Fund. You have to have X amount of homeless in your product. I mean, we do have 10 of these units are targeted to U.S. veterans. We have a partnership with a nonprofit called Preserving U.S. And we actually have an MOU with Preserving U.S., ourselves, and the Dane County Veterans Services Group. So
okay, yeah, I now that I know a little bit more about the Dane County Housing Fund, I suspect that would not be something that people in this community would want to see. So I would be pretty comfortable moving forward with a amendment or extension to the TIF at this point. So I'm good.
David? Any comments?
No, I would say, looking at the build out on it, obviously, I think they've taken a lesser fee than most developers have. And so I'd have a real problem if, we're looking at this developer fee listed on here is under 10% of the project. It's a little over 15 if you include what they call the contribution up at the top. But I didn't see anything on this list that made me think that we were just doing a handout.
Okay, Jason, any comments for us from you? You've been quiet so far here lately. No?
Not yet, no.
Okay, Kristen?
No comments from me. I'd support it. I guess that's a comment.
Okay, Todd, what are we looking at for this evening for Cohen-Esri? What are we to move this on?
I'm hearing consensus on recommending that the board consider utilizing the affordable housing extension of TID 2 to provide funding support to this project. Now, the finer elements of the development agreement would have to be worked out between the board and Cohen-Esri, but I think a formal recommendation from the CDA to recommend that alternative to the village board would be appropriate from what I'm hearing.
Okay, do we need a motion for that?
I would accept a motion.
Okay, so I would look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend to the village board using the affordable housing TIF amendment for the Cohen Esri project.
Okay, so there's a motion by Ann. Do we have a second? Jeff Tews with the hand up first, so I'm going to give that to Jeff. Any other comments? Okay, then Todd, do you want to do a roll call vote quick?
Yes, sir. Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Ann Lewandowski,
Yes.
David Kennedy,
Yes.
Jeff Tews,
Yes.
and Chris Zellner.
Yes.
Recommendation passes 5-0.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, gentlemen from Cohen Esri. And I am going to make the motion to adjourn. But before I do that, I'm going to say that we're 3 minutes off, but I'm going to blame it on Brent because of the computer technology malfunction. If we wouldn't have had that, we'd have hit our 7:30 number. So Brent, you got to take that with you. All right. So I'll make the motion to
I'll accept that. I'll accept that.
I'm going to make the motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Second by Kristen Runge. Show of hands for all in favor. Everybody unanimous, Todd. Thanks,
Good work,
everybody.
everyone.
Have a great holiday season for all of you out there, and we will see you all soon.
See you
Thanks,
in
everyone.
Thank you all.
January.
Bye.
I know.